It was just another patrol, or at least that's what I told myself that morning. After 18 years in the Israeli army, you stop counting the hours and start moving on instinct. The weight of the vest pressed into my shoulders, the dust clung to my face, and the horizon shimmered with that cruel desert heat that makes you squint until your eyes ache. My name is Ethan Ben Yosef. I was 38 years old, hardened by years of service, and in one violent moment, everything I thought I knew about life and death was torn apart. The explosion came without warning. 1 second I was shifting my rifle strap across my chest, listening to the chatter of my squad, and the next, the world convulsed in fire. The sound hit first, a deafening roar that shattered every boundary of noise I'd ever known. Then came the force, lifting me high, flinging me like a rag doll. I remember the sensation of flying without control, spinning between sky and sand, the colors bleeding into each other like some surreal painting. My breath was stolen, ripped from my lungs, and then there was nothing but impact. When I hit the ground, it was as though my body belonged to someone else. A violent jolt raced through me, and then silence. I couldn't move, couldn't even whisper. My comrades told me later they saw me sprawled on the sand, motionless, lifeless. To them, I was gone. And for 11 minutes, I was. Time lost its meaning in those moments. Soldiers will tell you that in battle seconds stretch, bending and snapping like elastic bands. Trauma rewrites time, dragging a heartbeat into an eternity. That's exactly how it felt the collapse of minutes, the unraveling of what I thought was real. One moment I was gasping in smoke and grit, and the next I was hovering, floating, watching my own body from somewhere above. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. After the blast, I expected ringing, screaming, chaos. Instead, a thick, serene silence wrapped itself around me. The desert below looked frozen, suspended, like someone had hit pause on the entire scene. My comrades were running, shouting, but I didn't hear them. I only saw their mouths open, their arms flailing, their bodies shaking mine, trying to wake me. It was like glass between me and the world, a thin veil I could see through but not cross. Then the pull began. It started faint, like the tug of a tide at your ankles. I felt myself being drawn away, not falling, not rising, just moving into a current I couldn't resist. My body grew smaller beneath me. The earth stretched out, and ahead was something new. A tunnel, vast and endless, opening in the distance. It wasn't dark, not at first. It shimmered with hues I don't have words for, shades that don't belong to this earth. I was caught between fear and wonder. Part of me resisted, a soldier's instinct screaming to fight, to claw back to the familiar. Another part of me surrendered, tired, aching, ready to drift wherever this river of light was carrying me. The tunnel swallowed me, and for the first time since the blast, I felt peace. No weight, no pain, no dust in my lungs. Only the sensation of being carried like a child, wrapped in something gentler than air itself. The walls around me pulsed with light, not harsh, not blinding, but alive like breathing silk that shimmered in rhythms I could almost hear. Shock turned into awe. Every soldier learns to anticipate death. You keep it in your pocket, hidden but always close. Yet nothing prepares you for the reality of it. I expected nothingness, the void, but instead I was surrounded by presence. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, thick with meaning, as if unseen voices whispered through it without sound. And then I realized something that chilled me. I wasn't alone. Shadows flickered at the edges of the tunnel, not frightening but watchful, as if guiding me forward. I tried to focus, to name what I saw, but every time my mind grasped at an image, it shifted. Familiar faces flashed my mother's smile, the stern eyes of a comrade long gone, but they were gone as soon as I recognized them. It wasn't hallucination, it was revelation. Something greater was unfolding, and I was just beginning to see it. The air, if you could call it air, hummed with a vibration that went deeper than sound. It resonated through my being, touching not flesh, but soul. I felt layers peeling back, every burden, every scar, every moment of fear loosening its grip. The desert, the war, the years of discipline, they all slipped away, leaving me raw and bare, yet freer than I had ever been. Shock gave way to realization. I was dead. Not metaphorically, not almost, dead. And yet more alive than I had ever known. As the tunnel stretched, I became aware of something drawing me closer at its end. A brightness, not like the harsh midday sun of the Negev desert, but like the first light of dawn spilling across water. Gentle, golden, irresistible. My soul leaned forward, aching for it, as though every longing of my life had been nothing but hunger for this moment. Somewhere in the distance, voices rose soft, layered, harmonious. Not songs with words, but currents of sound that wrapped themselves around me, pressing peace into my core. If shock was the first wave, awe was the second, and now something deeper swelled within me. Yearning. I thought of my comrades still scrambling over my body. I thought of my father's stern prayers at the dinner table. I thought of the battles I had fought, the decisions I had made, the weight of blood and duty. But all of it faded into silence as the light grew stronger. I was being invited forward, not commanded. Invited. 11 minutes on earth stretched into an eternity beyond it, and in that eternity I realized death was not the end. It was a threshold, a veil, a gate into something unspeakably vast. I drifted closer, trembling not with fear, but with reverence, and even before I saw him, I knew who was waiting in the light. The light embraced me, and within it, a figure emerged. I didn't need anyone to tell me who he was. My heart knew before my eyes could even form the outline. It was Jesus. His presence was unlike anything I had ever encountered, terrifying in its holiness, yet overwhelming in love. Imagine every fear stripped away, every scar dissolved, every wound soothed all at once. That's what it felt like to stand before him. He spoke my name. Not like a commander calling a soldier to attention, not like a stranger stumbling over syllables. When he said, "Ethan," it was like he reached into the deepest part of me, the place I didn't even know existed, and pulled me into perfect recognition. His voice wasn't sound, it was substance, pressing through me like a current that carried truth itself. "You have been given a rare gift," he said. And those words burned into my spirit. I could feel them settling deep inside me like fire that would never go out. "You will see the truth, and you must return to tell it." A tremor ran through me. Me, a soldier hardened by years of dust and discipline, suddenly felt small, unworthy, undone. Yet there was no condemnation in his eyes, only a fierce compassion that broke me more than any rebuke could. I dropped to my knees, or at least it felt like I did. My spirit bowed even if my body was somewhere else, lying lifeless in the sand. Then he showed me. The light shifted, and I was standing beside him, but also looking into something vast. The earth spread out below us, continents like brushstrokes on a living canvas. Oceans shimmered, clouds churned, winds moved with purpose. It wasn't just geography, it was creation itself, breathing, groaning, pulsing with hidden life. I gasped, because for the first time I realized the world was more alive than I had ever known. His eyes never left mine as he spoke again. "A global disaster is coming. Before September 20, millions will be shaken. What is hidden will be revealed. What is planned in darkness will be dragged into light." The words hit like thunder inside me. My chest burned, my breath caught. I wanted to argue, to plead for details, to understand. But no words came. Only stillness. His gaze was steady, unflinching, filled with both sorrow and resolve. I remembered my training in the army. Reconnaissance, threat assessments, scanning landscapes for dangers hidden in plain sight. Yet even with 18 years of sharpening my eyes, I had been blind compared to this. Now, in his presence, everything was stripped bare. The illusions of safety, the pride of nations, the confidence in governments. All of it was as fragile as dust in the wind. My awe deepened as he stretched out his hand, and suddenly I could see currents flowing around the earth, invisible rivers of energy, light and shadow interwoven. Some streams shimmered bright, carrying peace and hope. Others writhed in darkness, heavy and suffocating, seeping into cities, governments, and even families. I could feel the weight of them pressing, steering humanity in directions they thought were random but were anything but. "Look closely, Ethan," Jesus said, his tone soft but urgent. "This is the battle your generation has refused to acknowledge. They think they are in control, but they are being controlled." The truth landed with the force of a blow. My heart pounded in my chest. I thought of the soldiers I had lost, the politicians arguing over land and power, the ordinary men and women clinging to systems they trusted. All the while, unseen forces were pulling strings behind the curtain. I wanted to cry out, to warn them, but my voice stuck in my throat. Instead, I stood, trembling as the vision widened. I saw cities bursting with life, Tel Aviv, New York, London, people rushing through streets, chasing schedules, trusting their governments, their banks, their technology, as though those things could save them. Yet, behind every gleaming tower, every bustling market, shadows crept like smoke. My stomach twisted with dread, awe mixed with terror. Here I was, standing beside the creator of the universe, and he was showing me not just the beauty of the world but the fragile lie it rested on. I realized how small we are, how easily distracted by power and money and pride, while an eternal war rages unseen. And yet, in the midst of all this heaviness, his presence anchored me. The warmth radiating from him was unlike any fire. It didn't scorch, it healed. His gaze steadied me, reminding me that even as storms gathered, he was still Lord over it all. In that moment, I felt two truths colliding within me. 1. The world as we know it is about to change, catastrophically, undeniably. 2. In him there is safety. A safety not of this world, but beyond it. I wanted to cling to him, to beg not to leave his side. But deep down, I already knew he was preparing me to return. He wasn't just showing me wonders for my own heart. He was entrusting me with a mission. The awe that gripped me was no longer passive amazement. It became fuel, fire in my bones. If what he said was true, and I knew beyond doubt that it was, then I could not stay silent. My 11 minutes of death had turned into an eternal commission. The light shifted again, and suddenly I was no longer just standing before him. I was rising higher, pulled into a vantage point that no human could ever achieve. The earth stretched out beneath me, vast and breathtaking. Continents like strokes of paint across a living canvas. Oceans rippled with an iridescence that felt alive, as if the water itself was breathing. Clouds swirled and spun, not random, but with intention, like dancers moving to a rhythm beyond my comprehension. My breath caught in my chest. For years, my training as a soldier had taught me to scan landscapes for threats, to analyze patterns, to prepare for ambush. But here, what I saw wasn't chaos, it was design. Every gust of wind, every tide, every movement of light and shadow was woven together like threads in an eternal tapestry. For the first time in my life, I saw creation not as background, but as an active participant in the story of humanity. Then, the veil lifted even more. I began to see currents invisible to the human eye, streams of energy flowing through the world. They were everywhere, some luminous, glowing like rivers of fire, carrying warmth, love, and peace. Others, darker, heavier, seeped into places like ink poured into clear water, suffocating, pressing, shifting events in ways most people would dismiss as coincidence. I realized I wasn't just watching weather patterns or natural forces. I was witnessing the battlefield of existence itself. Forces of light and forces of shadow moved with intent, clashing in ways that shaped everything from the rise of nations to the breaking of a single human heart. My stomach churned. I had fought enemies face to face, but this was a war far beyond guns and borders. Jesus' voice broke through my thoughts, steady and piercing. "See, Ethan, this is the truth your world ignores. They believe they are free, but they are tangled in strings they cannot see." His words echoed through me, exposing the arrogance of human systems. I thought of governments drafting policies, of generals mapping strategies, of families making decisions in ordinary homes. Each believed themselves independent, in control. Yet I could see tendrils of shadow curling around their choices, nudging them, twisting them, turning their pride into weapons against themselves. I watched leaders in tall buildings, prime ministers, presidents, men in suits with pens that could send nations to war, moving like pawns, unaware that unseen hands were guiding their every move. Their faces looked determined, but their eyes betrayed something else: emptiness. And behind them, forces laughed silently, pulling the strings. A chill ran down my spine. The emotion flooding me was revelation mixed with dread. Humanity wasn't asleep by accident, it was being lulled. We were living under the illusion of control, while darkness manipulated from behind the veil. And yet, the light was still moving. Streams of brilliance flowed like fire over humble places, small villages, prayer gatherings, hidden corners of the earth where people still cried out to God. I saw elderly women whispering prayers in kitchens, children singing softly in candlelit churches, lonely men lifting weary eyes toward heaven. Their voices, their faith, rose like smoke, and the currents of light responded. I realized then the balance of this invisible war wasn't determined by governments or armies, but by hearts. One grandmother praying could shift the weight of nations. One child's song could push back against a tide of darkness. My chest ached with the beauty of it, and tears filled my eyes. Jesus' hand pointed, and the vision intensified. I saw creation itself groaning, responding to the spiritual state of the earth. Rivers swelled in anger, storms coiled like serpents, earthquakes stirred in silence. It was as if the natural world could no longer bear the weight of human rebellion. His voice returned, heavy yet resolute. When justice is abandoned, creation itself testifies. The revelation was almost too much to bear. I saw fields that should have flourished with harvest crack and wither under invisible oppression. I saw waves rise, crashing against coastal cities, with fury not born of weather but of judgment. I saw skies shift colors, bleeding with hues not seen before, as if the heavens were crying out a warning that no one wanted to hear. And still, people below walked in ignorance. They laughed, traded, scrolled through glowing screens, and debated politics while the earth beneath them groaned louder and louder. The gap between what they thought was real and what was actually happening grew unbearable. I wanted to shout, to rip open the sky and warn them. But I was frozen, only a witness. The dread inside me swelled until it felt like my chest would burst. And yet, even in the weight of it, I felt the steady warmth of Jesus beside me, anchoring me. A single thought pulsed through my being. This world is not what it seems. What we see is only a fraction of the story. Behind the curtain, forces fight for every soul, and creation itself bears witness to our choices. That revelation seared me. It was no longer possible to look at the earth the same way. From this moment forward, I would never again see a storm as just a storm, or a drought as just bad weather. Every tremor, every shift carried the weight of spiritual reality. And I knew, with a clarity that shook me to my core, that what I had been shown was not just for me, it was for you, for the world, for anyone still sleepwalking in a dream of control. The vision sharpened, and suddenly the beauty of creation was drowned by terror. I saw storms unlike anything humanity had ever faced, hurricanes roaring with fury beyond category, winds screaming with voices that shook skyscrapers to their foundations. Waves rose taller than the tallest buildings, curling like beasts poised to devour entire coastlines. Miami, New York, cities that never imagined their towers could fall, were swallowed in chaos. Lights flickered, then vanished into darkness. Streets turned into rivers where people ran, clutching children, grasping at hope that dissolved in the water around them. My heart pounded as I watched. I had faced war zones, but this was different. This was war against the earth itself, and it was merciless. The dread clawed at me, not just because of the destruction, but because I could feel it. It wasn't random. These storms weren't wandering freely. They were targeted, like arrows loosed from a bow, striking with precision that no natural pattern could explain. Behind them, in the unseen currents, I sensed a cold intelligence, a darkness steering the chaos. The vision shifted, and I saw the heartland of America. Green fields that once stretched wide and plentiful shriveled into cracked deserts. Iowa, Nebraska, places that had fed millions, now barren wastelands. Texas, the breadbasket of the South, lay scorched under relentless Sunday. Crops died week by week, families staring at empty silos, farmers on their knees in dust where wheat once grew tall. Hunger crept not like a sudden thief but like a slow, choking shadow. And then, with no warning, the scene twisted again. Snowstorms swept where snow did not belong. I saw Florida palm trees bent under the weight of ice, branches snapping, houses buried in snowdrifts taller than their roofs. The South froze in silence, unprepared for such cold. Families huddled in houses without heat, hearts beating slower and slower as breath turned to frost. My skin crawled. The weather itself had become a weapon, wielded with cruel precision. The earth convulsed under a judgment it could no longer withhold. The prophet's words came alive before me. Sow the wind, reap the whirlwind. Humanity had sown rebellion, and now the whirlwind tore through the nations. Fear rose inside me. I wanted to look away, but the vision pressed deeper. I could feel the cries of millions, terror flooding the streets, confusion gripping every soul. People who once trusted in their governments, their forecasts, their systems now stood powerless under skies that had turned against them. I had lived through rocket fire, but nothing compares to the helplessness of watching creation itself revolt. Yet Jesus' presence did not waver. His voice came, steady, filled with sorrow yet edged with unwavering truth. Ethan, the heavens are responding to the sins of men. When nations abandon justice, creation groans under their weight. His words pierced me. I thought of my own land, of blood spilled in wars, of injustice allowed to fester. Could it be that storms and droughts were not just natural cycles, but creation crying out against our rebellion? The thought burned in me, heavier than any weapon I had ever carried. I turned back to the vision and saw cities bustling as if nothing was wrong, people sipping coffee, staring at glowing screens, arguing about politics, while beneath their feet the earth cracked and above their heads the skies prepared to unleash chaos. My dread deepened, not just because of the disasters themselves, but because of the blindness. Humanity was sleepwalking into catastrophe. Even as destruction swept across lands, I noticed something else, a rhythm, a pattern. It was deliberate. Hurricanes struck coasts of arrogance. Drought crept into fields that had become idols of prosperity. Snow buried regions that mocked the idea of needing preparation. None of it was random. It was surgical, precise. I realized then that this wasn't merely about weather, it was judgment, measured and exact. The disasters weren't meant to annihilate without meaning. They were alarms, divine wake-up calls, screaming into deaf ears, repent before it's too late. The dread inside me shifted into urgency. I wanted to cry out to every soul. You cannot ignore this. You cannot wait for another storm, another quake, another collapse. The warnings are here. The earth itself is testifying. The vision pressed deeper still. I saw faces, families watching fields wither, children crying in darkened apartments, old men staring at seas that swallowed their homes. Their fear was palpable, but beneath it, I could see something else rising in some of them: awareness. A few fell to their knees, eyes lifted to the heavens, crying not to governments or leaders, but to God. And when they did, I saw glimmers of light pierce the shadow, faint but undeniable. Hope flickered, even in the midst of terror. But Jesus' gaze reminded me this was only the beginning. The shaking would intensify. What I had seen was not the end, but the opening act. The disasters, the chaos, the famine and storms were preludes to something greater. My chest tightened with the weight of it. Millions were not prepared. Millions still trusted idols of security and comfort. And time was running out. I could feel the tunnel behind me still glowing, pulling me onward into even greater revelations. But my soul clung to what I had just seen. The disasters were not accidents, they were orchestrations. The earth itself was responding to humanity's rebellion, and a dark force was twisting that groaning into weapons of destruction. And yet, even in that dread, one truth steadied me. Jesus was still Lord over it all. The vision lurched, and I was dragged from the surface of storms into the depths of the earth. The air grew cold, metallic, pressing against me like the inside of a tomb. Before me stretched vast caverns, not natural caves carved by rivers, but massive halls carved by men, buried beneath mountains the world would never suspect. Their walls glowed with sterile light, rows of screens flickered like watchful eyes, and the hum of machines vibrated through the stone. I shivered, not from the chill, but from the weight of what I felt. Something sacred had been defiled here. Men in white suits and uniforms crowded around consoles, their faces pale under the glow of screens. They looked proud, confident, as if they held the universe in their hands. Their machines pulsed with strange energy, cables snaking like veins, devices spinning with power that bent the air itself. I could sense what they were doing before I fully understood. They were tampering with creation. One screen showed patterns of clouds shifting across continents. Another tracked waves beneath the ocean. Dials twisted, knobs turned, and the earth responded. Hurricanes shifted course, earthquakes trembled at command, frequencies rippled across skies and seas. These men thought they had mastered nature. They believed themselves pioneers, sculptors of storms, bending the atmosphere to their will. My stomach twisted. I had seen arrogance in war leaders drunk on power, nations blind to consequences, but this was beyond arrogance. This was blasphemy. Jesus' presence burned beside me. His voice was heavy with sorrow, yet sharp as a blade. They try to play God with creation. They are blind to the consequences in the spiritual realm. As his words struck me, I saw it. Every action inside those caverns rippled beyond physics. Invisible waves poured from their machines, not just into skies but into realms unseen. For every storm they redirected, a spiritual wound opened. For every pulse they unleashed, shadows thickened across nations. They thought themselves masters, but they were pawns, stirring forces they could not control. I wanted to scream at them, to tear their hands from the controls. But I was only a witness, frozen as their pride unspooled chains that bound the earth tighter to darkness. Their mouths moved with excitement, their eyes gleamed with discovery, but I saw them for what they were: blind men leading humanity toward ruin. And then Jesus let me see the cost. Invisible pulses shot from their machines like arrows across the globe. Birds plummeted from the skies in perfect formation, dropping like stones into fields. Whales washed ashore in grotesque numbers, their bodies lining beaches like monuments of sorrow. People, too, felt the invisible weight. I saw children clutching their heads in agony, the elderly collapsing in confusion, artists and sensitive souls overwhelmed by migraines and despair. It was as though the very air had been weaponized, turned against creation itself. The emotion that filled me was disgust. Not ordinary revulsion, but holy outrage, the kind that twists your stomach and makes your chest burn. These men thought themselves geniuses, saviors of progress, but they were desecrating the very canvas God had painted. What they called innovation was corruption. What they called advancement was destruction. The machines pulsed again, and I saw societies reel under confusion. Electronics failed, animals scattered, people panicked. And behind it all, shadowy forces smiled, their claws embedded in the pride of mankind. But then, light. I saw Jesus standing inside one of those caverns. He was not a vision to me only. He was present, radiant like the sun, and the machines stuttered under his gaze. Screens flickered, sparks flew. Steel groaned as if creation itself was rejecting the corruption. His presence unraveled their plans in an instant. "I will expose what has been hidden in the dark," he declared, his words reverberating through both stone and spirit. "Every secret will be brought to light. Every scheme will collapse upon those who devised it. They have used my creation as a weapon, but creation will rise against them." His words shook me to the core. These underground halls, these experiments, these blasphemous manipulations, they would not last. They were fragile towers of pride, destined to crumble. Yet the cost of their arrogance would be terrible before their fall. I watched cracks appear in the very foundations of those caverns. The ground groaned, machinery shrieked, and scientists ran, faces twisted in disbelief as the earth itself rejected them. Their experiments dissolved like ash in fire. For a moment I felt relief, but the disgust inside me remained. Humanity had gone too far, and judgment was inevitable. I turned toward him, trembling. His eyes, filled with sorrow and authority, held mine. And in that moment I understood. This shaking wasn't just about disasters of wind and wave. It was about exposing the arrogance of men who believed they could replace God. That realization seared into me. Every button pressed, every lever pulled it, all had ripple effects beyond their understanding. I watched as the consequences unfolded, not just in the laboratories deep underground, but across the entire globe. Creation convulsed as if groaning under the weight of their pride. But Jesus wasn't finished showing me. The scene shifted, and I was standing above the financial heart of the world. Cities glittered with skyscrapers and neon lights, towers of glass and steel that seemed invincible. But the moment I looked closer, I realized they were hollow, like fragile shells. Every building, every screen was sustained by invisible numbers, data, currencies, digital codes, trust in systems that existed only as belief. I saw bank accounts swell with billions, investors in suits smiling over screens, glowing green with false assurance. And then, in an instant, it all collapsed. Cyber attacks, unlike anything the world had seen, ripped through the system. It wasn't just men in dark rooms with keyboards, it was something darker. I could see demonic entities whispering into the ears of programmers, guiding their hands with unholy precision. Firewalls crumbled, servers died, and the digital arteries of the world seized. One moment, wealth looked untouchable. The next, it evaporated into nothing. Fortunes were gone in seconds. Entire markets imploding like towers of cards. Investors screamed at dead screens, their eyes wide with horror as the gods they had worshipped their numbers. Their digits were stripped away. My chest ached watching them. Nations that had built their security on money found their foundations swept away. The words of Jesus seared into me. They have built their house on sand. When the tide rises, their false prosperity will vanish. Then came the power grids. I saw cities across America, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, suddenly go dark. not because of storms, but because of pulses that fried entire electrical systems. Satellites tumbled from orbit, sparks falling through the atmosphere like stars in mourning. Phones went dead, computers blank, systems lifeless. Technology itself bowed, its power stripped away in a single breath. People stumbled through streets in panic. Supermarkets were emptied in hours. Neighbors turned on neighbors, desperation carving lines between friend and enemy. I saw families once peaceful, clawing for scraps of food. Men and women who had never lifted a weapon found themselves fighting for survival. And still, the truth pressed deeper. I saw those pulses again, but this time I knew they didn't come from human hands. They came from heaven itself, a divine override. Systems built to exalt man were silenced by the power of God. Jesus' voice carried through the chaos, calm yet fierce. Even the machines will bow, every knee shall bend, every tongue shall confess. What man thought invincible will crumble when I choose to reveal my supremacy. The panic swelled in me as I watched. Decades of comfort collapsed in days. People who had trusted in governments, in technology, in wealth were suddenly adrift. Their idols had failed, and they were left with nothing but fear. And yet, amid the panic, I saw glimmers of light. Families kneeling in darkened living rooms, holding hands in prayer. Communities gathering not in banks or markets but in basements and barns, lifting their voices together in faith. And in those places, miracles unfolded. I saw cupboards with just one loaf of bread feed dozens. I saw jars of oil pour without running empty. I saw men and women who should have been broken by hunger, glowing with strength they couldn't explain. Those who trusted God weren't abandoned. Their faith became their provision. Still, the larger picture was undeniable. Society unraveled. The collapse was deliberate, both in human planning and divine permission. False gods were being torn down. What humanity had built on pride was being burned away. The emotion that consumed me was panic, but not only my own. It was the collective panic of a world unprepared, a chorus of fear echoing across nations. And yet, underneath that panic pulsed a truth I couldn't ignore. God was allowing every false security to fall so that only what was unshakable would remain. The shaking had begun, and no system, no wealth, no machine, no government would escape. The vision tore me away from collapsing cities and thrust me into the very center of the Middle East. The landscape spread out with piercing clarity: Jerusalem, Gaza, Damascus, Tehran, every stone, every border etched with a glow that wasn't earthly. But what truly stunned me were the forces I saw, forces invisible to the natural eye yet more real than any tank or soldier. Angels and demons clashed like armies of fire and shadow, their movements shaping the choices of kings, generals, and presidents. Leaders sat in war rooms, poring over maps, making what they thought were their own decisions. But I could see tendrils of darkness curling around their minds, whispering, twisting their pride, pushing them toward destruction. They believed themselves masters of strategy, but they were puppets in a war that stretched back to the dawn of time. My heart pounded, fire filling my chest. This wasn't just politics. This was Cain and Abel still raging, ancient hatred spilling forward into tanks, drones, and speeches. I wanted to shout, to warn them, but my voice was trapped, swallowed by the immensity of the vision. Then came the blaze of light. Angels, radiant and terrifying, descended over Jerusalem. They weren't soft or delicate. They were warriors, clothed in armor of living flame. The air itself seemed to hum with the weight of their presence. Each one could have leveled armies with a breath, yet they moved with precision, forming a shield around the holy city that no weapon could pierce. Jesus' voice thundered beside me, shaking even the unseen realm. My heavenly army takes its place for the final battle. What was prophesied long ago will now unfold. I trembled at the sound. My eyes burned as I watched rabbis, men who had spent lifetimes studying Torah, fall to their knees, tears streaming as they recognized him. It wasn't arguments or debates that opened their eyes, it was revelation, pure and undeniable. A great awakening swept through the Jewish people, and the joy of it collided with the fire of persecution. Families split apart. Some embraced their Messiah, their hearts exploding with newfound love. Others clung to tradition, anger twisting into betrayal. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Brothers became enemies. I felt their pain like a knife, the tearing of bonds once thought unbreakable. Persecution rose swiftly, brutal and merciless. Laws were passed in the shadows, stripping believers of rights. Churches shuttered, their doors chained, their altars desecrated. Yet, in hidden basements, in cramped living rooms, underground churches sprang to life. And oh, the power in those gatherings. I saw believers pressed shoulder to shoulder, whispering prayers with trembling voices. And then miracles unfolded. Walls that should have crumbled under bombardment held steady after their prayers. Families who had nothing shared meals multiplied in ways no logic could explain. Sick bodies healed in silence, fevers vanishing as children's hands rested on them in faith. The emotion that swelled in me was fire, burning, uncontainable. I felt the persecution, yes, but even stronger was the flame of revival blazing through it. These men and women, ordinary people, were becoming extraordinary in faith. Their courage lit up the darkness. I saw a woman who had lost everything, her home, her husband, her safety kneeling in prayer, her face glowing with peace no suffering could extinguish. I saw a man hardened by years of violence weep like a child as he felt the presence of Jesus in a hidden cellar. Their lives became beacons, drawing those who had mocked them just days before. Jesus' gaze was proud, fierce, unyielding. These are my people. They have chosen faith over fear. The wheat is being separated from the chaff. The pretenders fall away, but those who are mine will shine brighter in the storm. I looked again and saw empty churches in the west filling to overflowing as the shaking spread. People who had dismissed God as myth now crowded into pews, desperate for truth. Pastors who had once preached comfort now thundered with fire not their own, their words slicing through darkness. It was revival birthed in persecution, glory revealed through fire. The vision seared itself into my spirit. The Middle East, the awakening of Israel, the persecution of believers, the underground churches, all of it converging into a storm of both agony and triumph. And I knew this was not distant prophecy, it was beginning already. The fire of faith would either refine or consume, and every soul, every nation would be forced to choose. The vision expanded until it wrapped the entire globe. Darkness thickened like a storm cloud. Yet woven through it, I saw sparks of light growing brighter, multiplying, pushing back against the shadows. I realized these weren't just lights, they were people. Ordinary believers, radiant in faith, standing firm while everything around them crumbled. They weren't hiding in bunkers, clutching supplies in fear. They were out in the open, moving through chaos with peace on their faces. I saw them feeding the hungry with what little they had, praying for the sick in streets filled with panic, comforting children who had lost everything. And miracles followed them. A pot of stew stretched to feed dozens. A broken generator sparked back to life with a whispered prayer. Storms shifted, veering away from towns where voices rose in faith. My heart swelled with hope. Jesus' voice filled me again, steady and commanding. These are my bride, prepared in the fire. They are not shaken by the storm, because their foundation is in me. September 20 marks the point of no return. Those who are ready will stand. Those who ignore will be swept away. The words hit me with finality. September 20 was not just a date, it was a threshold, a dividing line. Once crossed, the world would never be the same. I looked again and saw idols collapsing. Towers of wealth crumbled, technologies silenced, governments shaken to their knees. People who had once mocked faith now pounded on church doors, begging for answers. I saw tears flood dusty altars as men and women confessed sins, hearts broken open by the weight of truth. The storm had stripped them bare, and in their emptiness they finally turned toward God. And yet, not all hearts softened. Some clenched tighter, their pride hardening like stone even as the ground shook beneath them. They cursed the name of God, shaking fists at the heavens. They clung to idols that were already ashes. My chest ached at the sight because even in the face of mercy, some chose darkness. The emotion that overwhelmed me was hope not naive, not shallow, but hope born from the fire of truth. Even as the shaking tore through the earth, faith was rising, purified, unstoppable. Then, Jesus looked at me with eyes that seemed to hold both galaxies and tears. "Ethan, you must return. Tell them, warn them, call them to prepare. My words are not given for fear, but for mercy. This is not the end, but the beginning of awakening. Those who trust me will not be abandoned. My bride will shine brightest when the night is darkest." I wanted to stay. Every part of me longed to remain in his presence, bathed in that eternal love. But even as I yearned, I felt the pull back toward my body. His voice seared into me one last time. September 20, remember. Speak. Do not be silent. The light receded. The tunnel closed. I felt myself falling, rushing back toward the broken vessel of flesh I had left behind. Pain exploded through me as my lungs gasped, ribs screamed, and voices cried out around me. My comrades' hands gripped me, shaking, weeping, shouting that I was alive. Doctors called it impossible, a statistical anomaly. But I knew better. I had been sent back with fire in my bones and a mission on my lips. I had died for 11 minutes, but in that death I had seen eternity. And I carried back not just visions of storms and collapse, but the undeniable truth. Hope is still alive, but only for those who choose it. The shaking has already begun, and time is running out. The images linger even now, sharper than any memory of war. I can still hear the silence of that tunnel, still feel the fire of his gaze, still tremble at the weight of his words. You may wonder if this was a dream, a hallucination, a trick of a broken mind. But I tell you, with every fiber of my being, it was more real than anything I have ever lived. I did not come back to entertain you. I came back because mercy pulled me through death and commanded me to warn. The storms, the famine, the collapse of systems, they are not far-off possibilities. They are rising, even now, like waves you cannot outrun. And yet, in the middle of the dread, there is a promise. You are not abandoned. You are not helpless. Those who anchor themselves in God, who repent, who let go of false securities, will find a peace that no storm can erase. I tell you this not to frighten, but to awaken. September 20 is not just a date, it is a threshold. Once crossed, there will be no turning back. But there is still time, and that time is now. So breathe deeply. Let these words press into your soul. Feel the urgency, but also feel the hope. You are loved, pursued, invited into a safety that no darkness can touch. If these words resonate with you, leave an amen in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and share it with at least 3 friends or family members right now. Now is your time to make a difference. Spreading this message is not only an act of love, but also a mission that Jesus himself has entrusted to you.